He had no legs, but they didn't know he had a war to win until 21 enemy planes fell from the sky. The Germans laughed at him. A fighter pilot with no legs didn't belong in the sky. Not in theory, not in practice, and certainly not in combat. By every rule of aerial warfare, Douglas Bader should have been harmless. He couldn't brace properly. He couldn't absorb forces like other pilots. He shouldn't have been able to turn, fight, or survive in a dogfight. That's what the Luftwaffe believed. That's what the Royal Air Force believed too once. And yet between 940 and 941, the legless pilot they dismissed destroyed 21 German fighters. Not by luck, not by recklessness, and not because he ignored the rules, but because the rules misunderstood something fundamental. In the air over Europe, pilots didn't die because they lacked courage. They died because their bodies failed them, they blacked out, they lost vision, they lost consciousness at the worst possible moment. Douglas Bader didn't, and the reason had nothing to do with bravery, training, or experience. It had everything to do with what was missing from his body. By the time the Germans realized why he kept winning fights other pilots lost, it was already too late to stop him. They laughed at the legless pilot until he started shooting them down. This is the story of the man who should never have flown, and why losing his legs made him one of the most dangerous fighter pilots in the sky. In 1931, Douglas Bader was exactly the kind of pilot the Royal Air Force wanted. Young, confident, exceptionally skilled in the air. At 21, he was already flying with No. 23 Squadron, operating Bristol Bulldogs frontline fighters of their day. His instructors noted his aggression, his control, and his instinctive feel for an aircraft at the edge of its limits. He was not cautious, he was precise, and precision in peacetime often turns into arrogance. On December 14th, 931 at Woodley Airfield near Reading, Bader accepted a challenge that should never have existed. Someone at the local aero club questioned whether he could perform a slow roll below 500 FT. The regulations were clear. Aerobatics below 0 FT were prohibited. The rule existed for a reason. A slow roll demands control margin. At low altitude, there is no time to correct an error. The aircraft either responds perfectly or it does not. Bader knew the rule. He took off anyway. He entered the roll far too low, 200 feet above the ground. The Bulldog rotated cleanly at first, wings level, nose steady. Then the margin vanished. The left wing tip brushed the grass. There was no recovery. The aircraft cartwheel wheeled. Metal collapsed. Fuel ignited. The impact destroyed the cockpit structure instantly. Bader was thrown clear, alive, but catastrophically injured. At Royal Berkshire Hospital, surgeons moved fast. Blood loss was severe. Shock followed. His right leg was amputated that same day. 3 days later, infection set in. The left leg followed, one above the knee, the other below. The doctors informed his family that survival was uncertain. Bader survived. When he regained consciousness, the damage was final. His flying career, as far as the Royal Air Force was concerned, no longer existed. The RAF Medical Board reviewed the case in March of 1932. Their ruling was brief and definitive. No pilot with prosthetic legs could meet flying standards. There were no exceptions, no appeal process, no experimental status. The decision was not personal. It was procedural. Flight demanded physical tolerance. Hygiene maneuvers placed extreme stress on the body. Blood pulled in the lower extremities. Vision narrowed. Consciousness faded. A pilot who blacked out died. A pilot with artificial legs, the board concluded, would black out sooner. The conclusion was logical. Bader was retired with a full disability pension at 21 years old. His logbook entry was short, crashed slow, rolling near ground. Bad show, one of that. For the next 8 years, Douglas Bader lived the life of a man officially removed from the air. He worked at Shell Oil Company. He learned to walk on aluminum and leather prosthetics. He modified a car so he could drive without pedals. He played golf, not casually, but competitively, refusing assistance, refusing sympathy. Outwardly he adapted. Internally nothing changed. Flying had not been a phase. It had been his identity, and the RAF decision had not convinced him he was incapable. only that the system was unwilling to reconsider its assumptions. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, the calculation changed overnight. Britain was at war. Pilots were no longer abundant. Experience mattered, aggression mattered, survivability mattered. Bader contacted every RAF officer who remembered him, every instructor, every commander who had seen him fly before the crash. He did not ask for sympathy. He demanded reassessment. The Air Ministry refused, then hesitated, then agreed to a test. In November 1939, Douglas Bader reported to the Central Flying School. The examiners expected a formality, a controlled failure that would confirm the medical board's original ruling. What they witnessed instead forced an uncomfortable silence. Bader flew aerobatics cleanly, loops, rolls, spins, recoveries. He handled the aircraft with discipline and precision, compensating instinctively for what his body lacked. He did not fight the aircraft. He worked with it. The chief examiner marked his performance as exceptional, and the RAF faced a problem it had not prepared for. There was no regulation forbidding a pilot with prosthetic legs from flying because no one had ever passed the test before. In February 1940, the board cleared Douglas Bader for combat duty. The rules had not been rewritten. They had been exposed, and the man the RAF once grounded permanently was about to return to the cockpit. Not as an experiment, not as a symbol, but as a fighter pilot in a war that would soon decide who survived the sky. The real test had not yet begun. Douglas Bader returned to operational flying in early 1940 without ceremony. There was no announcement, no special designation, no acknowledgement that the Royal Air Force had reversed a decision it once called final. He was assigned to No. 19 Squadron at Duxford Spitfires, modern fighters demanding aircraft. No allowances to the men around him. Bader was not a symbol. He was a problem. A pilot with prosthetic legs raised uncomfortable questions. Would he slow the squadron down? Would he need special handling? Would he freeze in combat? Would he break under pressure? Bader answered none of them with words. He flew. In May 1940, the war arrived over France faster than anyone expected. German armor rolled west. Allied lines collapsed. British forces withdrew toward the coast. Fighter Command was ordered to cover evacuations at Dunkirk. Bader flew his first combat patrols in that chaos. He did not hesitate. He did not ask for modified procedures. He did not request exemption from aggressive maneuvering. On June 1, 1940, he recorded his first confirmed kill. The German pilot never saw it coming. What mattered more than the victory itself was what followed. Bader did not return shaken. He did not return exhausted. He did not return needing explanation. He returned irritated that the fight had ended too quickly. 2 weeks later, Fighter Command promoted him to acting squadron leader and handed him something few officers wanted. No, didn't quarren to do a squadron. The squadron was in poor condition. It had been mauled in France. Aircraft were worn. Morale was worse. The pilots, mostly Canadian, were angry, exhausted, and convinced they had been sacrificed by poor planning. They did not welcome a new commander. They especially did not welcome one with artificial legs. Bader assessed the situation the same way he assessed aircraft function before comfort. The squadron lacked spare parts. Maintenance tools were missing. Operational readiness existed only on paper. So Bader did something that immediately defined his leadership. He grounded the squadron. He sent a message up the chain of command that was deliberately blunt. 242 Squadron is operational as regards pilots, but non-operational as regards equipment, and/or he refused combat status. This was not insubordination. It was leverage. Within 48 hours, the missing parts arrived. Bader did not thank anyone. He put the squadron back in the air. By July 1940, the Battle of Britain was underway. German bombers crossed the Channel daily. Fighter escorts followed. Interceptions became routine, then relentless. Bader flew every opportunity he was given. He did not conserve aircraft. He did not conserve fuel. He did not conserve risk. Under his command, no 242 Squadron changed character. Pilots flew tighter formations. Attacks were decisive. Losses dropped. Claims increased. On July 11th, Bader intercepted a Dornier 17 off the Norfolk coast. 2 short bursts, the bomber vanished into cloud-trailing smoke. On August 30th, he led 12 Hurricanes against over 100 German aircraft over Essex. His squadron claimed 12 enemy fighters destroyed. They lost none. By late summer, Bader's reputation was spreading not through official reports, but through quiet acknowledgement among pilots who noticed patterns. He stayed conscious in turns where others struggled. He pressed attacks longer. He recovered faster. There were no reports of blackouts, no signs of hesitation under load. At first, this was dismissed as experience, then as aggression, then as temperament. But the explanation never fully satisfied the men who flew with him. In August 1941, Bader was promoted to wing commander at RAF Tangmere. He commanded 3 squadrons now flying offensive sweeps over occupied France. These missions were deliberate provocations. Cross the Channel, climb to altitude, force German fighters into the air, destroy them. The strategic objective was simple. Keep Luftwaffe units tied down in the west, while Germany expanded the war elsewhere. Bader flew these missions repeatedly, 63 times by his own count. The pattern was predictable. Radar detection, German scramble, 15 minutes of combat, claims on both sides, losses on both sides until the Germans started paying closer attention. They learned his call sign. They studied his tactics. They noted how aggressively he turned into fights others avoided. They did not know why. By mid-1941, Douglas Bader had been credited with more than 20 confirmed victories, placing him among the top fighter aces in fighter command. The irony was unavoidable. The Royal Air Force had grounded him permanently at 21 because it believed his body could not endure air combat. Now at 30, he was commanding wings and destroying enemy aircraft at a rate few pilots could match. Something in the original calculation had been wrong, not morally, not procedurally, physically, and the day the Germans finally prepared a response to Douglas Bader, the day they decided to remove him from the sky entirely. They did so without understanding the very factor that had kept him alive. On the morning of August 9th, 941, with perfect weather and no cloud cover, Douglas Bader climbed into his Spitfire and led another routine fighter sweep over northern France. The Luftwaffe was ready, and for the first time since his return to combat, Douglas Bader was about to lose control of the situation completely. What happened next would cost him more than the RAF ever did. For most fighter pilots, the danger did not begin with enemy fire. It began inside their own bodies. Aerial combat in the Second World War pushed human physiology to its limits. Fighters did not turn gently. They snapped, they dove, they pulled hard into high-G maneuvers that forced blood away from the brain. Vision narrowed, colors faded, consciousness slipped. Pilots called it graying out, well, one then blacking out. And when it happened at the wrong moment, it killed them. Training tried to compensate. Breathing techniques, muscle tension, experience. None of it changed the basic problem. Flesh and blood had limits. Douglas Bader had already crossed one of those limits years earlier. He did not discover the advantage deliberately. No one taught it to him. No manual described it. It revealed itself gradually in fragments, moments where something that should have happened didn't. In hard turns, Bader did not lose vision when others did. In sustained maneuvers, he did not fade when others loosened their grip. In close combat, he remained alert a fraction longer. A fraction was enough. The explanation was brutally simple. Bader's legs were aluminum. They did not pull blood. They did not draw circulation away from the brain. They did not increase the physiological load under G-force. Where other pilots fought their own bodies as much as the enemy, Bader did not. It did not make him invulnerable. It did not make him immune to error, but it shifted the margins, and air combat was decided in margins. By late 1940, Bader had become something fighter command valued deeply and cautiously. A pilot who did not degrade under pressure. He turned harder, held engagements longer, committed decisively when others hesitated. The Luftwaffe noticed the results before it understood the cause. German pilots began encountering British formations that did not break when expected. Attacks pressed closer, turns tightened, defensive reactions came faster. Reports filtered upward: aggressive wing commander, unusual persistence in combat, high survivability. By early 1941, Douglas Bader was no longer just a successful pilot. He was a problem. From RAF Tangmere, he led large offensive sweeps across the Channel. These were not defensive patrols. They were designed to provoke, to force German fighters into the air, to exhaust them. Bader favored altitude and initiative. He attacked downward, then climbed aggressively back into position. He was relentless. German intelligence took notice. They mapped his patterns, tracked his call sign, marked his preferred engagement zones. They did not know what made him different, only that removing him would remove a disproportionate amount of pressure. By the summer of 1941, Douglas Bader had been credited with 21 confirmed victories. He was among the highest-scoring aces in fighter command, and he was flying more often, not less. On August 9, 1941, the weather over northern France was perfect. Clear skies, unlimited visibility, no cloud cover. Conditions like that favored defenders. There was nowhere to hide if an engagement turned against you. Bader led his wing across the Channel anyway. The mission profile was routine: climb to 30,000 FT, cross the coast, force contact, disengage. It had worked dozens of times before. This time the Luftwaffe had prepared. As the formation approached the French coast near Luck, German radar stations tracked them precisely. Fighter units were already scrambling. At altitude, Bader scanned continuously above, below, behind. He knew where the danger would come from. The Sun 12 BF-1, 109 seconds climbed from below 40,000 FT beneath his formation. They had not yet spotted the British fighters. Bader reacted instantly. He called the contact and rolled into a diving attack. The geometry favored him. Altitude translated into speed, speed into position. He selected the lead German aircraft and closed rapidly. 200 YD he fired. 8 Browning machine guns opened simultaneously. The stream of fire tore into the engine, cowling. White coolant vapor exploded outward. The German pilot rolled away, damaged and likely destroyed. Bader pulled up hard, searching for another target. He found one turning left at his 11,000. He tightened his turn inside the German's radius and fired again. The tail section disintegrated. The pilot bailed out at altitude. 2 victories in under 90 seconds. Then the situation reversed. The remaining German fighters had seen the Spitfires. They were no longer climbing blindly. They were maneuvering for position. A warning crackled over the radio. Enemy fighters approaching from high and behind. Bader initiated a brake turn. That was when something struck his aircraft from the rear. The impact was not glancing. It was catastrophic. Metal tore. Control cables snapped. The Spitfire lurched violently to the right. Bader looked back. The vertical stabilizer was gone. Part of the rear fuselage had been sheared away completely. The aircraft entered an inverted spin, nose down, accelerating toward the ground from 30,000 FT. For a brief moment, training took over. Bader reached for the canopy release and pulled. The canopy tore free. A wall of wind slammed into the cockpit at nearly 300 mph. He released his harness and tried to stand. His right leg did not move. The prosthetic was jammed, forced into an impossible position by the violent spin, wedged between the seat and the control column. Altitude unwound rapidly, 25,000 FT. Bader pulled with both hands. The leg did not budge. 20,000. The aircraft was accelerating. The spin was tightening. 15,000. He calculated the time left, seconds, not minutes. Douglas Bader understood the situation clearly. If he stayed, he would die. If he tried to free the leg, he would die. There was only one option left. He reached down and unbuckled the upper leather strap that secured the prosthetic to his thigh. He left the leg behind. The wind began dragging him out of the cockpit, but the lower strap was still attached. He was half outside the aircraft, half trapped by centrifugal force, 10,000 FT. The ground was rushing up. Bader reached for his parachute rip cord and pulled. The canopy deployed instantly. The deceleration was violent. The remaining strap snapped under the load. Douglas Bader separated from the wreckage. Below him, the Spitfire fell away. One artificial leg still jammed inside, tumbling separately toward the ground, 4 miles south of Luket. The aircraft impacted seconds later. Under the parachute, Bader looked down. One leg hung normally beneath him. The other ended at the knee. The advantage that had kept him alive in the air had just cost him something he would never recover, and he was descending into enemy territory. The sky had finally let him go. The ground would not. Douglas Bader landed in occupied France with one artificial leg. No weapon, no escape kit, and no illusions. German soldiers reached him within minutes. When he regained consciousness, 2 of them stood over him, unbuckling his parachute harness. One of the soldiers stared openly at the place where Bader's right leg should have been. He said something in German and pointed. The assumption was obvious. They believed the pilot had lost his leg in the crash. Bader did not correct them. He was transported north toward Sint. Amer to a Luftwaffe hospital, once a French school now marked with red crosses and filled with wounded German aircrew. He was the only British patient there that day. A German doctor examined him carefully. Minor concussion, bruised ribs, abrasions along both arms. Then the doctor noticed the left leg. He paused, called for an interpreter, asked questions slowly, precisely, as if he already suspected the answer. Bader explained both legs lost years earlier, flying since February 1940, combat operations ever since. The doctor did not believe him. No Air Force, German or British, would permit a double ampute to fly fighters. It violated everything aviation medicine accepted as possible. So the doctor checked the uniform pocket. Inside was Bader's service record, Wing Commander, Distinguished Service Order, Distinguished Flying Cross, bars to both medals, over 20 confirmed victories. The examination ended. The doctor left the room without another word. He returned 30 minutes later, this time with a senior officer. Adolf Galland entered the hospital room shortly after 1,300 hours. Galland was 30 years old. Gruben commander of Jag-Zonvans, one of Germany's highest-scoring aces. He had heard Bader's name before intelligence briefings mentioned the aggressive British wing commander leading large formations over France, but no report had mentioned prosthetic legs. Galland looked at the artificial limb, then at the empty space where the others should have been. He spoke English well enough to dispense with the interpreter. He asked about the crash. Bader explained calmly. The aircraft had broken apart. The leg was trapped. He had to leave it behind. Galland nodded. He did not argue. He did not smile. He asked a single question. What do you need? Well, if you get side 9, medical care, food, water, and a replacement leg. The request should have ended the conversation. It did not. Galland said he would see what could be done. He left the room. Bader did not know whether to believe him. German officers were usually professional with captured aircrew, but the idea that the enemy would arrange for a prosthetic limb to be delivered across the channel bordered on absurd. That night, Galland contacted Luftwaffe headquarters. He explained the situation and requested permission to offer safe passage for a British aircraft to drop medical supplies for a captured wing commander. The request moved upward through channels that rarely approved anything remotely humane during wartime. It reached Hermann Göring in Berlin. Göring had been a fighter pilot himself. He understood the culture of air combat, the unspoken code that sometimes survived even when nations were trying to destroy each other. He approved the request. On August 11th, Galland sent a message through Red Cross channels to Area Fighter Command. Wing Commander Douglas Bader was alive. He required a replacement prosthetic leg. The Luftwaffe would guarantee safe passage for one British aircraft to drop the leg by parachute over Santamer. No anti-aircraft fire, no fighter interception. A 4-hour window was specified. The message reached Air Vice Marshal Trafford Lee Mallory at No. 11 Group Headquarters. Lele Mallory knew Bader personally. He had worked with him throughout the Battle of Britain. The offer was unprecedented. It was also an opportunity. The RAF had already planned a bombing raid in the region Circus 81. Saint-Omer lay only 20 m from the primary target. Lee Mallory approved a solution that satisfied both requirements. 6 Bristol Blenheim bombers would carry out the raid. One would carry a wooden crate instead of bombs. Inside the crate, a right prosthetic leg, leather straps, bandages, socks, tobacco, and chocolate. A note was attached. Please deliver to Wing Commander Bader, RAF prisoner of war. On August 19th, 941, the bombers took off. They crossed the channel under fighter escort. German radar tracked them. Luftwaffe units were alerted. Galland had briefed his pilots personally. No engagement until after the leg drop. At Stower Hospital, German guards moved Bader to a room overlooking the airfield. They told him to watch. He did not believe them until he heard the engines. 6 bombers appeared overhead, flying low. One passed directly above the field and released the crate. A small parachute deployed. The box descended slowly and landed beside the runway. German ground crews ran to retrieve it. The agreement was complete. Galland picked up his radio and issued the next order. German fighters scrambled. The troops covered Saint-Omer, only not the primary target. Combat erupted as the bombers continued toward their objective. The raid caused limited damage. Aircraft on both sides were lost. War resumed exactly where it had paused. At the hospital, German orderlies carried the crate into Bader's room. Inside was the leg, a newer model than the one he had lost. Better straps, improved fit, manufactured by the same London company that had made his originals nearly a decade earlier. Bader strapped it on, stood, walked across the room. The German doctor watched carefully, asked if it fit. Bader said it was perfect. That afternoon, Bader sent a message through Red Cross channels. Leg thankfully received our 3 words. But as he stood in the hospital, something else became clear. Security at Saint-Omer was lax. Windows were unbarred. Guard rotations were predictable. The hospital was not designed to hold a prisoner who intended to leave. And Douglas Bader now had 2 functioning legs again. For the first time since being shot down, escape was no longer theoretical. It was physical. The Luftwaffe had given him the one thing he needed to start trying again. Douglas Bader did not wait for an opportunity to appear. He created one. Saint-Omer Hospital was never meant to hold a determined prisoner of war. It was a temporary medical facility staffed lightly, guarded casually, and designed around the assumption that injured men wanted rest, not escape. Bader observed everything. Guard rotations repeated on predictable cycles. At night, only 1 sentry patrolled the corridor. Windows were unbarred. Bed sheets were thick, woven cotton long enough to knot. His room was on the 2nd floor, 20 ft above the ground. Outside lay open farmland. Beyond that, roads running west toward the French coast and the English Channel 15 miles away. On the night of August 24th, 941, Bader tied 4 bed sheets together and secured them to the bed frame. He waited until 0:20 hours. He opened the window. The sheets dropped cleanly. Bader climbed out and began descending. He was halfway down when a hospital worker on the ground floor saw movement and shouted. Guards responded within seconds. Bader was pulled back inside at 0215. The Germans reacted immediately. The bed sheets were confiscated. A second guard was posted outside his door. At dawn, the hospital administrator arrived with orders. Saint-Omer was no longer suitable. Douglas Bader was to be transferred to a permanent prisoner of war camp. On August 27th, he was transported by train under armed guard. His destination was Stalag Luft 3, 300 m east in occupied Poland. Stalag Luft 3 was not a hospital. It was a machine. Double barbed wire fences surrounded the compounds. Guard towers stood at each corner. Searchlights swept the ground all night. The camp commandant Ostrid Wilhelm von Linder ran the facility according to Geneva Convention standards, but he ran it tightly. Food was adequate. Medical care was provided. Mail flowed through the Red Cross, and escape was expected. The camp held roughly 2,000 RAF aircrew. Most had been shot down over Europe. Many were experienced officers. All of them understood the mathematics of captivity. Escape was unlikely. Success was rare. Recapture was common, but trying mattered. The senior British officer was Group Captain Harry Day. He had flown with Bader years earlier, before the crash. When Bader arrived, Day did not waste time. He briefed him on the camp's operations. Tunnels were already under construction. Forgery operations produced German travel papers. Civilian clothing was sewn from dyed uniforms. Guard schedules were mapped meticulously. Day also explained the reality. Neutral territory was hundreds of miles away. Most escapees were recaptured within 48 hours. The camp was deep inside, occupied Europe. Bader listened. Then he said he would escape anyway. The German guards had been briefed too. They knew who Bader was. They knew about Sant. They knew he had tried to escape 5 days after receiving his replacement leg. The commandant made a specific decision. Every night at 200 hours, guards entered Bader's barracks and removed both prosthetic legs. They returned them at 060. The logic was simple. Without his legs, Bader could not reach the wire. He could not dig tunnels. He could not move quickly in the dark. The restriction worked. Physically, it did not work strategically. Bader adapted. If he could not dig, he watched. If he could not crawl, he listened. If he could not run, he planned. He became part of the intelligence network inside the camp. British prisoners had established a sophisticated forgery operation. German travel permits, identity papers, work orders, railroad passes. The forgers needed references, examples of real documents, details of procedures. Bader provided them. He spoke to prisoners who had worked outside the camp, collected information about German administrative routines, learned guard shift patterns, recorded rail schedules. In October 1941, a new plan emerged. A prisoner named Bill Ash had obtained a technical diagram of a Messerschmitt cockpit engine, start procedures, flight controls, fuel management. A German training airfield existed near Glowitz, roughly 150 miles away. The field housed operational fighters. If 2 prisoners could reach the airfield, steal an aircraft, and get airborne, they might reach neutral territory, or at least Allied lines before being intercepted. The plan was reckless. Bader volunteered immediately. Ash pointed out the problems: distance, fuel range, radar coverage, German air defenses. Bader accepted all of them. On November 3rd, a work detail left the camp 20 British prisoners, 4 German guards. Ash and Bader had switched identities with 2 legitimate workers using forged papers and stolen uniforms. The guards checked the documents. They waved the group through. The prisoners boarded a transport truck and drove southeast. They arrived at the work camp near Glowitz the following day. The training airfield was visible in the distance, and then the plan collapsed. The aircraft on the field were Messerschmitt 109E, earlier models with insufficient range to reach any neutral country. Stealing one would result in interception within minutes. Ash and Bader debated their options: steal the aircraft anyway and attempt to run west or abort and wait for another opportunity. They chose to abort. They returned to the work camp. Within 24 hours, German military police arrived. A routine inspection at Stallagluft 3 had uncovered discrepancies. 2 prisoners were missing from Bader's barracks. The identity switch was discovered. Ash and Bader were arrested and transported back under guard. The camp commandant was furious. The forgery operation had bypassed multiple security layers. Bader was placed in solitary confinement. 10 days and 8x6 FT cell, 1 bed, 1 bucket, food twice daily, no books, no contact. When he was released, new restrictions followed. Constant surveillance, guards accompanying him everywhere, random inspections at all hours. The Germans believed they had solved the problem. They had not. They had only confirmed something they were beginning to understand. Douglas Bader was not a man who escaped successfully. He was a man who never stopped trying, and that made him dangerous in ways fences were never designed to handle. So, the Luftwaffe made its final decision. Douglas Bader would be sent somewhere no one escaped from. In March 1942, German High Command reviewed Douglas Bader's file. 5 escape attempts in 7 months. Centaur Hospital, Glivitz. Multiple plans detected before execution at Stalag Luft 3. The conclusion was no longer debatable. Douglas Bader was not an ordinary prisoner of war. He was a persistent escape risk. The Luftwaffe issued transfer orders. His destination was Olag Fiercy Kilitz Castle. Kilitz was not a camp in the conventional sense. It was a fortress, a medieval structure built on a cliff overlooking the Mulde River in Saxony, 80 miles south of Berlin. 7-foot-thick stone walls, barred windows, guard towers integrated into the architecture itself. It was where the Germans sent prisoners who had defeated every other layer of containment. Bader arrived on April 2nd, 1942. The castle held roughly 200 prisoners, British, French, Polish, Dutch, Belgian. Every man inside had already escaped from somewhere else, or come close enough to force the Germans to escalate. The guard-to-prisoner ratio was nearly 1:1. Roll calls occurred 4 times daily. Random searches were constant. Cells were inspected without warning. Escape attempts here were not discouraged. They were expected. The senior British officer was Colonel Willie Todd. He briefed Bader immediately. No tunnels had ever succeeded. No prisoner had escaped Kilitz and reached freedom. Every attempt increased restrictions for everyone. Bader listened carefully. Then he asked what plans were underway. Cold. Its prisoners did not lack imagination. They forged documents, studied guard routines, mapped blind spots, calculated distances. In the castle attic, an area German guards rarely entered because of its height and access. One group was building something extraordinary, a glider. The plan was audacious to the point of insanity. Launch the glider from the roof at night, clear the castle walls, glide across the river, land beyond the perimeter before alarms could react. Engineers among the prisoners calculated lift coefficients, wing loading, stall speeds. Every gram of weight was accounted for. The glider was built from bed slats, floorboards, and improvised fasteners. It would work on paper, but it would not be ready for months. Bader did not wait. He searched for faster solutions. In June 1942, he joined a tunnel project starting from the chapel basement. The tunnel descended 20 FT to avoid German sound detection equipment and ran 40 FT toward the outer wall. 8 FT remained. On July 8th, guards discovered it during a routine inspection. 12 prisoners were arrested. The tunnel was flooded and sealed with concrete. Bader was not among those caught. He had been working surface operations that day, timing patrols, watching shifts, coordinating signals. The German response was immediate. The commandant ordered collective punishment. Rations were reduced. The chapel basement was closed permanently, and Bader received personal attention. He was moved to a more secure cell. Guards checked it twice daily at random intervals. Surveillance followed him everywhere. The message was clear. Kilitz would not be beaten by persistence alone. For the next 3 years, Bader remained at the castle. He attempted 4 more escapes. None succeeded. Some were discovered in planning stages. Others failed on execution. All ended the same way with tighter restrictions. But failure did not diminish his influence. Bader could not crawl through tunnels easily. His prosthetic legs made confined movement difficult, but he was invaluable above ground. He observed, he coordinated, he advised. Prisoners referred to him as bloody-minded, a term that carried admiration, not insult. When guards confiscated his legs at night, he adapted. When searches intensified, he shifted methods. When routes closed, he opened others. Escape at cold became less about freedom and more about resistance. Every plan forced the Germans to respond. Every response tied down manpower. Every failure taught the prisoners more about the system holding them. By early 1945, the war outside the castle was collapsing. American forces advanced from the west. Soviet forces pushed from the east inside Kilitz. Guards grew nervous. Discipline weakened. Supply lines thinned. On April 16th, 1945, artillery fire echoed in the distance. German guards began abandoning their posts throughout the morning. By midday, only the commandant and a handful of soldiers remained. At 1:04 hours, American Sherman tanks arrived at the castle gates. The gates opened, 200 prisoners walked out. Douglas Bader crossed the courtyard on artificial legs into sunlight he had not seen freely in 3 years. American soldiers stared openly. One lieutenant asked how long he had been a prisoner. 3 years and 9 months. He asked about the legs, lost them in 1931, been flying since 1940. The lieutenant did not believe him until other prisoners confirmed the story. Bader reached American lines on April 18th. British liaison officers met him shortly afterward. He was debriefed for 2 days. German camp layouts, guard rotations, tunnel locations, security procedures. Bader provided everything. Then the officers told him something he did not expect. While he had been behind wire, his story had spread. The public knew his name, the Legless fighter ace, who refused to stop fighting. And now, with the war in Europe effectively over, the Royal Air Force had one final decision to make. What to do with the pilot they once grounded permanently? History had not finished with Douglas Bader yet. Douglas Bader returned to Britain in April 1945. He was 34 years old. He had spent 6 years at war, flying from 1940 to 1941, imprisoned from 1941 to 1945. The Royal Air Force debriefed him for 2 days. They wanted details: camp layouts, guard rotations, security failures, tunnel systems. Bader gave them everything. Then came the silence. No one quite knew where to place him. The RAF offered staff positions, training commands, administrative roles, work that kept him inside offices, away from cockpits, sensible roles, safe roles. Bader declined. He had flown when he was not supposed to fly. He had fought when he was not supposed to fight. He had escaped when he was not supposed to move. He was done being managed. What he did not know, what no one had told him yet, was that his story had escaped before he did. During the years he spent behind wire, British newspapers had followed his fate. The fighter ace with artificial legs, the pilot shot down over France, the prisoner who kept trying to escape. His name became shorthand for refusal. By the summer of 1945, the war in Europe was over. Germany had surrendered, Hitler was dead. The sky was finally quiet, and the Royal Air Force planned a victory fly past over London. 300 aircraft would fly over the capital. Spitfires, Hurricanes, Typhoons, Tempests, every fighter type that had carried Britain through its darkest hours. Someone had to lead the formation. The choice was not symbolic. It was inevitable. On June 15th, 1945, Douglas Bader climbed into a Spitfire once again. Artificial legs locked in place, straps tight, controls familiar. At 1,500 hours, the formation lifted off. 300 aircraft formed